Okay, let me welcome all of you who've joined us uh, on behalf of CARE and Climate Action Network South Asia. This is a short but very important webinar where we have a very distinguished panel to talk about the fact that it's time for gender transformative climate action for a 1.5 degree centigrade world. Okay. Now, a few housekeeping rules. It's a very tight program across continents. So first thing is I would request everyone to, mute, keep themselves on mute. You can show yourself on video if your bandwidth allows, but in these webinars, generally the background noise is sometimes quite disturbing and at times very embarrassing. We don't want to hear your personal phone conversation or anything like that. So make sure that you are mute unless you're actually talking. That's the first one. The second is please have most of the questions directed to through the chat box. It's very tight, and I don't know whether we'll have time to actually ask people to come on line to answer. So we may have to take the questions right out of the chat box and ask the distinguished panelists to address them. Also, there's a small technical problem. Our Climate Action Network chief in Delhi, South Asia, sent an email by mistake with his link. So there are quite a few people with their own, with his name, Sanjay Vashist. Please sign out and sign back on your own name with the link you've been provided, or change your name there. Also keep, if you can see, if you can keep your organization name there so people know who you are. We will go straight away now to the panelists. The first one is Tasneem Isop. She's the executive director of CAN International, based in South Africa. And she's been on some pretty important global climate policy issues, for being the strategy leader for WWF, and also has served on the board of Global Call for Climate Action, and was an active participant, has been an active participant in the work of Climate Action International. So Tasneem, right off to you. You have, well, roughly 7 to 9 minutes. I will maybe signal when you come close to that time. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deepak, and greetings to everybody. And thank you to K&K South Asia for inviting me to speak at this really critical event. Now, the topic for discussion about, it's time for gender transformative action, and especially towards a 1.5 world, is so relevant in the current context that we're living through. And if anything, our experience of this crisis, this global health crisis, teaches us many lessons for how we need to address the global climate crisis. And so it is clear, just through this recent experience of the health crisis, that again, women and girls are disproportionately impacted by crises generally. And this was very evident, as I said, during the COVID pandemic. It is evident. We witnessed two key lessons in this period. The one is, of course, as the pandemic hit us, that society is generally reliant and dependent on women to deal with crises, whether they're frontline workers, especially health workers, whether they're needing to take care of households and others in the neighborhood. Those frontline services that women provide was critical in addressing the support that was needed in the initial phases, of course, of the pandemic. And as the pandemic continues, it's still women who provide those critical services. And so this recognition of work that women do has been there. You know, we've seen social media thanking our frontline workers and especially women in the health services. And this, of course, one of the challenges would be, while we all acknowledge the critical role that women play, and especially frontline workers, society and our economies don't value that. So it's really important to look at how we translate our recognition into real material changes for women, and especially women workers on the front line. So this is one lesson. The disproportionate impacts is the first. The second is that women play a critical role in society, but as usual, that's not recognized in the way we value that work and those services, largely exploitative and underpaid and undervalued. And so in these times of crises and multiple crises, each of which compounds that existing fragility and vulnerability on the part of women, recognizing that, of course, you know, we are going through a COVID pandemic, but at the same time, we have also been hit in many places by extreme weather events related to the climate crisis. And so these compounding calamities puts immense pressure on women and girls specifically because of the nature of this disproportionate impact. And therefore, our key question must be, of course, and there's enough studies coming out that point to the impacts that this pandemic has had on women and girls specifically, whether it's just in terms of moving towards, you know, more and more extreme poverty. While there have been gains made in the past, what's happened through this crisis is, of course, we are witnessing, again, a move towards extreme poverty, and the statistics are quite horrifying. We're expecting, in some instances, the figures are saying between 70 to 150 million additional people moving into extreme poverty. More than half of those would be women. And so we have an immense challenge on our hands because, of course, the climate crisis will exacerbate that much further. And so what do we need to do in terms of ensuring that this transformation, this gender transformation, materializes in the context of compounding crises? And how do we ensure, in fact, the many gains that have been made in this space over the years, and especially since the Convention on Eliminating Discrimination Against Women over 40 years ago? How do we ensure that those gains are not rolled back? Because they are being rolled back. We have seen, for example, in this during this pandemic, not only, you know, the kind of economic insecurity and the economic and social impacts on women, but we have also seen the kind of increase in violence against women across the world. And there are lots of reports talking to this very serious emerging threat towards women. So certainly, gains are being rolled back, and our defense line in this period going forward and in addressing the climate crisis as part of a series of multiple crises would need to be to firstly defend all those rights and progress that we have made as women and for women and girls in the world, and certainly then look at the lessons of what we have not managed to achieve and to get right. And for me, at least, the fundamental lesson here is to, of course, recover in a way that addresses inequalities and discrimination against women, but also to ensure that the plans we put in place has to build and support the resilience, especially of women and girls, to multiple crises now and in the future. And you only will be able to achieve genuine, sustained resilience building of women by women. And so there are lots of plans and policies, there's amazing international conventions. In the end, why are we not making progress? It needs to be interrogated. And what that interrogation has to lead us to is the fact that one can only find sustained solutions if women themselves are at the center of those solutions. And there have been many examples of locally led initiatives of building resilience at community levels where women have been those agents of change. And we should be learning from that. Why have countries, for example, very few countries included gender responsiveness or gender policies in the NDCs, which this report that we're going to be discussing exposed? It's exactly because women are not at those tables. They are not part of the planning processes. They are not part of the solution finding processes. And so a central recommendation has to be that we have to see women-led processes that then look at plans and policies that put women and girls at the center. And very importantly, and the last point I'd like to make is that we have to recognize that our priorities would have to address, in fact, those who are worst impacted by these multiple crises, and certainly that would be those women and girls across the world, and specifically more so in developing countries, who are living in poverty and who are suffering inequality. And these are also differentiated based on, the issues of whether you're experiencing a racial justice, whether you're in conflict areas, etc. So your fragility is also impacted on by the context and your demographic, your socioeconomic status, and the context in which you live. So certainly our solutions would have to be women-led. Our solutions would have to be led from the bottom. Women are agents of change, and to have a transformative world, which of course has to be one in which we keep our temperature goals below 1.5 degrees, this will have to be the basis for that transformation. And they're going to be massive transformation. But if we cannot come out at the other end with a world that ensures the leadership, equality, justice, meaningful participation, and the addressing of discrimination against women and girls, then we would not have achieved a just and transformative world. So I do think we have strong lessons from this global pandemic for how we need to address or not address the climate pandemic, and the attention of the world has to be one in which we display solidarity with women and girls who are actually bearing the worst brunt of these compounding multiple crises. Thank you very much for affording me the opportunity to make the intervention, and I look forward to the engagement and hearing my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Rasneem. Disasters are a forensic moment, and this COVID disaster no less globally. And thanks for pointing out, because of this forensic moment, what we are learning, and you pointed out that grimly, is that the gains in equality for those left behind, as we call them, are being rolled back. And this is a time for all of us to be even more alert to make sure that those gains are not lost. And of course, the thing of getting more achievement in the future. Thank you very much. We now move to our second speaker, Inge Vianen, who's the global leader for climate change and resilience platform at CARE International. This is going to be important because Inge has been leading and coordinating the integration of climate change and resilience across CARE's entire development and humanitarian work. She also led the Green Livelihood Alliance and worked at ILO for on gender equality. Okay, and has taken part in the climate negotiations from COP13 to 15, and also a policy advisor for the ACT Alliance. Her presence, you will have this presentation, it's important, and I have set in the chat box the link to the report card, which CARE has recently brought out, which shows where we stand with all these nationally determined contributions. So the floor, Inge, is yours.
Thank you very much, Deepak, for this introduction, and thank you also, Tasneem, for the inspiring opening of this webinar. I'm just wondering if you can see my screen, if it's sharing.
Yes,
Yes, that is
perfect.
Yeah. Okay, great. So thank you for the opportunity to present our newest report to you, report card, Where's Gender Equality in the NDCs? CARE believes that improving gender integration and increasing climate ambition are two sides of the same coin. And that is why in our report, we have really taken a close look at how gender equality is integrated in the NDCs. Before going into the details of the report, I would like to take you through some backgrounds quickly. In December 2020, we published a similar report, the first edition, about the updated NDCs that were delivered up to that date. But now, in the meanwhile, more NDCs have been submitted, so we felt that it was right to publish an updated report. And in this new report, we used a similar analytical approach, and we've added some interesting case studies from Nepal, Tanzania, and Bangladesh about CSO engagement in the NDC processes. The report is the result of a CARE and CAN South Asia cooperation, which is then part of a joint CSO project on participatory NDC revisions. So why did we want to take a close look at gender equality in the NDCs? As a humanitarian and development organization, CARE notices that the realities on the ground are that while climate change threatens livelihoods and human security across the board, women and girls often face higher risks and greater burdens from climate change. And what we see is that resources and options that women have to act on climate change are really strongly dependent on gender norms, and that being a man or a woman is a decisive factor in determining the level of risk from climate change. But besides being a vulnerable group, women are also agents of change and stakeholders and are on the front line to combat climate change. And therefore, we see improving gender integration and increasing climate ambition as two sides of the same coin. And it's also why gender equality is at the heart of CARE's new Vision 2030, a climate justice impact area. How did we assess the integration of gender in the NDCs? For doing this, we have really drawn on the excellent WeDo's Gender Climate Tracker NDC review framework. And we focused on three program areas, of which the first one is governance. In this area, we looked at three aspects. First of all, we checked on references to gender or women in the NDCs, including the share of women's contribution. And we also looked at the context in which the reference was made. Did it refer to specific commitments related to mitigation, adaptation, addressing loss and damage, capacity building, to implementation, or was the gender reference cross-cutting? Thirdly, we looked at the ways in which women are positioned in the NDC. Are women only positioned as a vulnerable group, or are they also positioned as beneficiaries of projects and policies, as agents of change, or as stakeholders? And besides governance, we also looked at the program area of planning, with regards to two different aspects. The first one being the existence of gender responsive budgeting in the NDC. And we also analyzed the existence of participatory planning processes for the NDC. And then lastly, we looked at the program area of implementation and enhanced climate policy instruments, where we focused on the existence of a mechanism or process for monitoring or implementing the NDC. Based on these 6 categories that I just mentioned to you, we developed a country ranking system, which is explained to you on this very slide. Countries are ranked by summarizing their performance in the 6 categories. And as you can see, all the way on the top, we have the light green category, the role model category. Those are the countries that did most to integrate gender equality, that scored high on all of the 6 indicators. And as you can see, these are 7 countries. We also have the laggards category, that's the red category all the way down. They did not score on any of the 6 categories or only on one of these 6 categories. And we have therefore identified them as laggards. And in that group, we found 15 countries. So then what does that look like? The result of this analysis is actually shown in this world map. We have analyzed the NDCs for 56 countries. And the results of that are portrayed in this world map. As I just mentioned, there are 15 red countries, the so-called laggards. They clearly jump out here. They are Armenia, Brazil, Thailand, Senegal, Maldives, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, Angola, Nicaragua, New Zealand, USA, Japan, Cuba, Andorra, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. And the 7 light green countries are those that scored best, the role models, so to say. They scored best on the integration of gender in the NDCs. And those countries are Cambodia, Marshall Islands, PNG, Kenya, Honduras, Nepal, and Panama. The key findings of our report. What is really noticeable is that there is not one single developed country in the role model group. And even in the second best group, the so-called progressive group, we only see one developed country included, and that is Norway. Also, there is almost a complete absence of gender-responsive budgeting in the renewed NDCs. Only Chile's revised NDC mentions that the design and implementation of the NDC will consider a fair allocation of charges, costs and benefits with a focus on gender. On the positive side, in most countries, there is now a stronger integration of gender than in the previous NDC, so that is quite positive. But we also notice that despite the NDC revision, a big gap still remains regarding the 1.5 degrees Celsius mitigation ambition and the scaling up adaptation and loss and damage action. In our report, we have given 12 recommendations to take forward, and I will highlight a selection of those to you. In the program area of governance, we recommend that the NDCs give reference to women and gender in the context of commitments in the various thematic areas, as well as in relation to their different roles. And with regards to planning, we believe that it is crucial to pursue gender-responsive budgeting, including planning for how the gender-responsive measures will be financed. Also, during the planning process, a gender and social analysis of climate change policies, programs and actions should be undertaken so that gaps and opportunities in relation to the integration of gender can be identified. And with regards to the program area of implementation and enhanced climate policy instruments, we recommend that there be engagement of gender-specific institutions, such as gender focal points across ministries, departments and agencies with adequate technical capacity and authority. Also, a participatory planning process is an important task, which should really ensure the effective participation of the groups which are particularly vulnerable due to marginalization and discrimination, including women and women institutions in the NDC process. And then lastly, it is essential that developed countries increase their financial support for ambitious NDC implementation. I have come to the last slide of my presentation, and there's just one more thing that I would like to convey to you. I would like to stress that judging the gender performance in the NDC is not, of course, the same or not equaling the gender performance of a specific country's overall climate governance and policy approach, but we hope that with this report, countries feel encouraged to highlight their approach to gender equality in the NDC, and that those countries still in the process of revising their NDCs consider looking at this report and look at how the role models went about the incorporation of gender issues. And even in the absence of a gender-wise strong NDC that has been submitted, we still recommend those countries to step up on the integration of gender during the implementation of their NDC. Thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Deepak.
Thank you, Inge. I think this is a very powerful presentation you've made, uh, and the report card. I'm not surprised to see the US as a laggard country after Donald Trump. I mean, it would be surprised. I would be surprised if they were not. But I was very surprised to see Japan, Thailand, and New Zealand, especially. Good Lord. I mean, you'd have thought New Zealand would have been way up there as one of the role models. So surprises never cease, do they? I do hope that both CARE and can speed courier this report to Joe Biden, who has said US is back. Well, welcome, but said would want to take a lead. Well, if you want to take a lead, you better finish your homework. So I hope you do that. And you raise a very critical point that I think should be highlighted again, because in the Twitter sphere and social media, the G7 meeting and all is being heavily already criticized for this, token reference to financial support. The same thing had been said many times over in the past, and the promise not fulfilled. So the question raised now is, why should we believe you now? Okay, so I think these are extremely important points you've raised. We go to our next speaker, Dr. Krishna Prasad Oli, my fellow countryman here. He is an honorable member of the National Planning Commission of Nepal, a very senior body that handles, most of the, in fact, all the planning and development issues, including a lot of things with related to climate. I've known Dr. Oli for a long time. He is and comes with a very strong background in environmental law, which he has been teaching in university here, and also as a visiting professor in universities from China to Hawaii. Okay, he comes with an even stronger background in actually putting all that into practice in his work in a range of developmental and environmental work in his career. So I'm sure he's going to be very happy with the CARE assessment that Nepal is on the role model level. Well, that makes me a bit unhappy, because I'm a critic of the government sitting outside as a civil society member. But I'm sure Dr. Oli is going to be very happy. Over to you, Dr. Oli.
Namaskar, Deepakji. Thank you very much.
Namaskar.
Thank you for all the panelists also. It was wonderful to be here in this webinar. Basically, it is related to, as far as I understood, gender transformation, transformative climate action, I have been told. Well, let me start with what we are doing in Nepal, particularly in case of gender inclusiveness. As Deepakji is well known, 33% of the electorate are parliamentarian now. I think in the whole region, this is one of the milestone in the country. So 33% of the parliamentarian who make the law, they are women actually. And if we go into the provincial and local level also, there is a very, very meaningful participation of women, particularly in this new federated governance structure. With respect to Nepal's case, particularly in Human Development Index value, Nepal women are still in low. If you see, women are in terms of Human Development Index value 0.549 converts to male 0.619, which is the HDI value is only about 11.3% higher in case of men or lower in case of women. There are provincial disparity, and there are also ecological belt disparity here within the country. Particularly, the degree of disparity is highest in Tarai region of Nepal, which is about 0.870, while there is marginal gap between urban and rural. And surprisingly, we have come up with this Human Development Report 2020. In Nepal, I suppose in other parts of the world also, women tend to live longer than men here. Nepal is well ahead of most of the South Asian countries except Sri Lanka and Maldives in gender disparity and in human development. gross national income, particularly in women, is still low compared to men here. SDI value is in both the sexes actually is gradually improving, and multidimensional poverty has been reduced greatly. Now the problem with us is actually, we are the 9th vulnerable country in terms of climate change and its impact. And in addition to that, we have COVID. So sustaining human development gain that this country has made so far is a big challenge in the face of climate change impact and COVID. And so, particularly for women in the rural area, we actually in the government have given quite a lot of attention. Health problem was here because of the pollution problem, indoor house pollution problem. In order to reduce those, the government has actually established, say, 434,000 biogas in houses also. That is going to be increased, and that actually helps to reduce the indoor pollution causing lungs related and respiration related diseases, mostly in case of women. And similarly, we have now given priority in establishing commercial level of installation, particularly in biogas sector, and then solar photovoltaic technology is also there. With respect to education, also significant progress actually in women's reproductive health and right, maternal mortality, child mortality, adolescent pregnancy. These are being improved here. Women life expectancy has been increased from 2011. It was 69-year-old, now 72 years. Though the progress is still uneven in certain areas. Maternal mortality has been significantly fallen from 539 lakh for birth in 1996 to 239 in 2016. And selective abortion is also declining. Girls scholarship, day meal, and particularly in one of our province number 2, Beti Bachao and Beti Padhao, save the girls and educate the children. Girls child. This is a major agenda of province number 2. This is also helping quite a lot. And female literacy is also going up here in Nepal. It is currently 60.5% in case of female, compared to male 76.2%. So that means we are actually moving ahead. But our big challenge is again sustaining this human development gain in the face of this pandemic, COVID. So this is one of the biggest problem. 1.5 degree mitigation ambition. For that, our nationally determined contribution report, which we did work quite a lot, we are actually focusing towards achieving attaining clean energy mechanism, particularly in replacing or substituting the carbon-based fossil fuel. This is one area which we are doing. But as earlier two speakers mentioned about the climate change and its impact and maintaining 1.5 degrees Celsius, it is a very, very difficult task for us. We have many programs, particularly for carbon sequestration and local level adaptation plan and national level adaptation plan also. They are in operation. But the difficulty with this particular case is one country, and specifically Nepal, a developing country, underdeveloped country, trying to actually jump or graduate from underdeveloped to developing country, we are facing a lot of problem. And this problem can only be solved only through global solidarity. And this solidarity must come. I think the COP26 is coming in November in Glasgow. So let us see that there will be a global solidarity, and the funding which is actually promised by the developed country or the rich countries has not been reached to the poor country, particularly for the implementation of this LAPA, NAPA adaptation plan and also mitigation plans. So this is one of the major area which Madam Inge has also raised. And I think the government of the globe, I mean, different government, during the COP meeting, this should be one of the major agenda. I think the global solidarity, particularly to address the big challenges like climate change and COVID impact, as mentioned earlier, by earlier speaker, we are also facing major problem here, economic collapse, every aspect. Hopefully, through the vaccination and other process, this will reduce. But gender disparity and gender violence are also there. So the biggest problem here is, not only in Nepal, but in many other countries also, we have international legal instrument, particularly for the protection of child, protection of women, and human rights. The implementation is the major challenge. So every country needs to be aware and very much dedicated for their implementation. Policies are fine, if every country has their own policy, particularly for gender equity and equitable distribution of resources among women, and this is not happening. So in order to move ahead, I think the government should and must, not only the developing country, even in developed countries also. I think if we see the proportion of women participating in the political decision-making process, in the university system, in the health system, it is not asymmetric. So that is why I think we all have to work really hard on this issue. And because basically, women who not only are 50% of the world, but I think they are the source of inspiration. They are women producers. So we must take care, and right needs to be well protected. And in this line, the current government of Nepal has taken initiative, and as I have mentioned some of the data, that we are progressing towards the positive direction for equity and equality among the gender group. But the biggest problem and challenge we have to face now is how to sustain human development gain. This is major challenge, particularly in the face of climate change and COVID pandemic. So this is where we have to be very careful. And I think it is not impossible, because a lot of these things have happened. Take example of human ingenuity to go to the another planet and explore there. So this was possible. Why not we make gender equity possible? So this is what I want to say. And thank you very much for joining me here, for allowing me to talk for about 5 to 9 minutes. Thank you, Deepakji, for your welcoming me and all the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Oli. Thank you. That was very interesting. And I'm glad you pointed out that we have more than, we have already met this 33% parliamentarians being women target. That's a major milestone. There's a lot more to be done, but still that's a major milestone. And I'm also glad that you raised this issue of indoor air pollution. I might just highlight that one of the issues on climate change and indoor air pollution and gender, they're all interlinked here, is the need for Nepal to leapfrog, and the leapfrog is happening. A civil society activist group, the National Association of Community Electricity Users Nepal, already has a major campaign, which the government is now supporting, to replace not just liquefied petroleum gas, LPG cooking, but also firewood cooking in the villages.
Yeah.
What is interesting is that firewood and LPG, firewood stoves have an efficiency of 15 to 20% energy efficiency. LPGs have about maybe 35%. But electric induction cookers, and we have a surplus of hydro coming up in Nepal right now, have an efficiency of 84%. And they are becoming cheaper by the day. So there's a massive campaign here. And if we can do that, we will have tackled women and their problem with indoor air pollution, their problem of drudgery, cooking pots that have cleaning cooking pots that have been cooked on, firewood versus those that have been cooked on induction cookers, and also the health issue and solving the shift from petroleum fossil fuel cooking to clean hydro. Thank you, Dr. Oli. Thank you for that. We move to our next speaker from Sri Lanka, Vasita Wijayanayake. She's the executive director of, how do I pronounce this? Slycan, SLYCAN Trust, Sri Lanka Climate Trust. And she's basically an expert on international law, is an attorney at law specializing in public international law. She's been working on international environmental law, UN human rights law, refugee law, and EU law. And she's been on the national committee in Sri Lanka on many climate change adaptation committees and exercises. And so she'd be interesting is now she's going to be really talking about all these things we talk about at the higher level, at the theory and policy level. We now move to what I call toad's eye science, the view of the toads at the bottom, as opposed to the eagle eye science, the view from high policy level. So we see how, as the American expression goes, the rubber hits the road. What happens when things, what happens at the grassroots when these things that we talk about really meet the reality down there. So over to you, Vasita.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, wherever you're joining us from. So I am representing Slycan Trust, which is a non-profit think tank, a civil society think tank. We function as headquarters from Colombo, Sri Lanka, and we work at regional level as well as local and national level. We are also a member of Climate Action Network. So if I may just show you the screen. One second. I hope you can see. So I thought a few images might be helpful. So I will be speaking about how climate justice and gender justice combine and how this applies for ensuring that resilience and climate ambition could be enhanced. And this would align with some of the work that Slycan Trust is doing as part of one of the projects implemented with CAN International as well as CARE, focusing on NDCs, localizing of NDCs as well as gender responsive actions. So when you're looking at climate justice, gender justice, and climate action, there are a lot of overlaps. So if you look at climate justice, some of the key things that we would focus on, which other experts who spoke earlier also highlighted, there would be human rights angle to it, the right to development, then also addressing the different levels of society, the communities in terms of economic empowerment, and then decision-making processes at local levels, not necessarily just national level. Basically just accepting that everyone is not the same and we need to work with everyone. So it leads into collective action and ensuring that discriminations are not made and that we facilitate everyone to engage and address climate impacts that are exacerbated by the discriminations or the vulnerabilities that are there. And gender is part of this discussion. So we would have gender focused in our actions through full distribution of power and opportunities, and then looking at how we can create opportunities for women as well as women and men to work together, understanding different contexts. And this would focus on livelihoods and also access to resources, capacity building, skill development, access to information, and also then leading to climate action where empowered actions could happen. This could focus on just transition, participatory processes and decision-making at local level as well as community level, or even the family context. And then how we can have localized planning processes. So we have a few projects focusing on this as well. And then evidence-based actions where research could contribute to empower or contribute to climate as well as gender justice. And there's also a component of youth empowerment, again, livelihoods based on the skills, capacity development, as well as awareness. So when we are putting things into action, a few photos are there. I'll just bring a few examples how empowering communities could lead to climate justice as well as gender justice. So one would be integration of gender responsive actions at local level. So in our projects, we ensure that capacity building could happen for women and men, girls and boys to work together. And we ensure that participation is at least equal in research work that we do, capacity building work that we do, and also in decision-making processes where we have multi-stakeholder discussions, engaging the governments entities, as well as other stakeholders. And then also looking at the empowerment and also the independence and the freedom of decision-making through economic empowerment. So this connects with youth empowerment as well as women-focused capacity building, as well as just transition-based. So if we have vulnerable communities, how climate justice could be through capacity building and skill development, which leads to empowerment. So this would be identifying livelihoods that need to be focused on risk transfer so that they're resilient, as well as how we can identify economic diversification. So most of the communities that we work with would be farmers or fishing community, because the projects that we implement have a strong focus on agriculture sector as well as coastal and marine sectors. So how, for example, ecotourism could be an option, or biodiversity conservation could be an option, which would lead to addressing climate impacts, resilient building, as well as economic empowerment. Then risk transfer mechanisms, social protection, how it leads to, again, just transition aspects. And we ensure that everyone is aware of the opportunities that are there, the information is shared, and also that there are links to those suppliers or the information providers. So direct access to information is possible as well, or at least building opportunities for enhanced access to information, as well as opportunities to empower themselves. An integration of climate action into local level planning. So some of the work that we're doing at the moment, that relates to how landscape management could be integrated into local level planning processes. And this includes taking into account risk management, climate risk management, also livelihood development, which would relate to addressing resilience building. And also research and evidence-based actions, so that we take into consideration the vulnerabilities that are existing, and then we also ensure that there's data that can be used. And in doing this, we have made sure that youth are part of this, and that we engaged with community-based employment processes as well. So 2 sites that we work in, mainly we have 2 people recruited from the community, so there's trust and that they could actually contribute to understanding the context better. So these are some of the things that we work on, and we also ensure that our workforce reflects what we preach. So we have about 53% female members in our team out of about 35. And then we also have 50% below 35. To ensure that we build capacities to ensure that there's just transition, climate justice, as well as gender justice in the work that we do. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Rosita. Uh, I think Alok Sharma is not going to be with us, which is a shame because well, he's a very important person. He's probably practically responsible for all of COP26 that's going to happen in Glasgow. When is it? In September, I believe. So it's understandable. It gives us a bit more time to get into some discussions. There are a couple of questions that have already come up in the chat box. Please put more questions from your side to either all the specific speakers or to everyone in general, and our speakers will look at each one of them and give their answer. We have about 10 minutes, 15 minutes of this. I would like to put one question to all our panelists when they address everything from everyone else, which is this. Okay, COP26 is around the corner. You know, what is it? What is the most important thing that you and your organization are going to bring to that table? One, I've already mentioned, the financing issue has always been a shame. Uh, None of the commitments way back from, as I remember, I was in Kyoto way back in, what is it, 1997. From then on till today, none of them have really been met. Uh, every one of these big programs are called unfunded mandates, that the money has never been put in there. So that is going to be one issue, definitely. But what are the other issues that each one of you would like to, or your organization will be carrying? What are those issues to COP26? If you could quickly reflect on that also as you answer some of the other questions. I already see some questions. There is one for Inge. So why don't we start with you, Inge?
Thank you very much, Deepak. Yes, for the COP, climate finance and gender equality are really our key areas to influence policymakers. This year, we have already issued 2 reports about climate finance. The last one is called Hollow Commitments. We released it 1.5 weeks ago. And the title already states it, Hollow Commitments. A lot of commitments have been made, but in reality, they're not coming true. And we've also published a report which is called Fact or Fiction. And again, the title already states it. The finance is not coming through. So for us, this is a really, really important topic to influence the COP negotiations on. And of course, the issue of gender equality is also on top of our agenda. I saw a question, or maybe you first would like to have all the speakers respond to your question.
No, you carry on, because I don't think it was very short time. You finish yours and then I'll move to other speakers.
Okay, yeah.
As questions come in, we might come back again.
Great. So I saw a question about the lack of ambition from Yvonne Blos and in the EU, and how to deal with the EU and the European Green Deal. Just a few thoughts. The EU should, of course, have gender differentiated analysis for all the relevant sectors covered by the EU Green Deal, and should integrate the findings in the design of policy measures. And where the EU provides specific resources through their funds, gender should really become a clear criterion for Green Deal measures. So really be integrated there. And of course, the EU should promise to make gender aspects a key part of their reporting in the NDC implementation. These are just a few thoughts. And of course, I would like to refer to the NDC report that I just presented the results on. We will release it next week, as Sven has just mentioned in the chat box. And yeah, there will be some more ideas there on how to influence that process also. So I hope that that responds to the question that was posed in the chat box. Okay,
great. There was one question from a colleague in Nepal here, which I'm going to pass on now to Dr. Oli, which was this whole question of drying up of springs. Well, as for the rest of the panelists and others on this webinar, springs high up in the mountains are the lifeblood of villages. You know, that's where people get their drinking water from. You cannot get drinking water from rivers because rivers are 1,000, 2,000 meters below. So it's the spring sources. When springs dry up, village life comes to a standstill. People have to migrate, out-migrate. There are issues of abandonment of entire settlements. But when springs dry up or springs start giving less water, the first to be hit are women. Because they have to carry water for or stand there for longer times just collecting water. Now, this has been immediately people jump and say climate change. Our research, together with ICIMOD, shows that no, not yet. Climate change will make this much worse across the Himalaya, the drying up of springs. But right now, the drivers are sometimes the very effort to sort out this issue and reduce women's drudgery of having to carry, water for 2 hours, 6-7 pots every day from, the spring source to up to their village, walking, 2-3 hours every day. There is this massive use of pumping. Now, indiscriminate use of pumping is one of the contributing factors to the drying up of springs. The other being that outmigration from villages and decline in livestock that has led to the destruction of buffalo wallowing ponds, which lead to the recharge of springs. Okay, so there are multiple causes like that. Not yet only climate change, but climate change is going to make it worse. So the question came there. This is a big issue, especially for women, the drying up of springs, and is also related to energy. And so how would we answer that? Plus the other questions that have come here to all the panelists. Dr. Oli, you can take a stab at it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Deepakji, because you are also very familiar with that issue. Spring drying up in the mountain. This is the question, is it right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That came up from one.
Well, spring drying up, is it because of climate change impact or not? It is yet not clear, basically. The most important thing is, climate change. Of course, in certain periods, there is no water. Others, there will be heavy water. So basically, aquifer layer, water is accumulated under aquifer layer. So if the recharge system, in some cases, particularly in case of Kathmandu, in case of even tropical area, Tarai area also, what has happened actually is, the shallow tubes which are there, at the shallow level, it has been dried out due to over harvest. But in case of mountain, it is not the case. There are seismic event also, which we don't know as yet how much, because of the seismic event, how much these spring sources are dried. But what the government is trying to do now is in the very dry area, the water from the river, which is lift drinking water schemes are also applied. Recently, we have inaugurated 2 in very dry area within Panther district in Yashok, and similarly in dry area in Bhojpur also from Arun River. There are programs which are going on. Lift irrigation is one, but at the same time, recharging pond, particularly in traditionally, if we see in the whole of the Himalayan region, in the high mountain top, there are ponds we call Pokhari and others, particularly they were used for recharging also and changing the thing. So there are some progress which are going on. Over 500 such ponds are actually already dug in the whole of the Churia range. They are already there. So the government is actually focusing on this also. I think that is what. The other point is, many people also talk about the, underground water table has gone in tropical plain also. But as you are aware, Nepali Sambat 2030 since 2030, Nepali Sambat, there are 200 deep tube well, 42 meters deep below. They have been constantly monitored, and that water table has not gone down as yet. This is the latest information I can give. And particularly for the mountain, it is a problem, but we don't know how, why it has come. The scientific validation is still required because recharge should be there. If there is, surface runoff is very high, then I think this is one problem, but basically seismic events. And at the same time, we don't know, but massive infrastructural development are also going on throughout the mountain region also. That may have some impact, but I am not sure. So this is one thing. The first question, I would like to stop there to respond to this question. The other question which you asked to all the panelists is, what should we bring to the COP26? What will be our agenda? Basically, one agenda is the financial agenda. Another I can see is we are talking about climate change and its impact and maintaining to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But already it has exceeded. The trajectories are already going far beyond 1.5 degree in some of the areas. So technology is another area where I think that should be discussed. Technologically rich countries, they have technology, and how we can actually bring into the developing countries. And also other thing is, how to circumvent depletion of essential natural resources. That is one of the most important area, because most of the essential resources are being used by the developed countries. Still, take example of timber in tropical area. They have been harvested, and high value crops are also, because of the high value, the poor country cannot buy, and they are going. How we will manage those things? So there is not a quick fix for this, but I think financial, technology, and very essential natural resources, how should we circumvent the depletion? So these are some of the issues I think we must actually bring here. Okay, and it should be a global collaboration.
Not thank you. That was good. I think 2 points that you raised there. That's good. We move to Tasneem now. Tasneem, your take on the discussions.
Yes, thanks very much, Deepak. And so not anything different. The CAN network main priority for COP26 is actually finance. The final delivery of commitments that have been made more than a decade ago that has not been fulfilled. And we've just seen in the G7 meeting, very disappointing outcomes, the same commitments to fulfill commitments, but the commitments are not fulfilled. So certainly finance, and particularly finance for adaptation, and more so for loss and damage. Exactly, because the other important thing we will be pushing is for all countries, of course, to increase their levels of ambition to bring down emissions, and especially the rich developed countries to increase their ambitions, because the less they do on that front, the more risk there is on, the impact side of the work. So that's clear. For us, two big things: finance, and increased ambition, especially by rich countries.
Okay, thank you. That was perfect. I go now to Vasita.
Yes. So I saw a question that was in the chat box as well, which was directly about examples of how community actions could happen. So I feel like to address the needs of communities, it's important to focus on the economic aspect, because the competition usually happens with that. So if we address these through gaps and needs which are properly assessed in prior to implementing climate action, that could bring down the issues that we have in implementing and ensuring that climate justice and gender justice happen. To answer the COP question, I think everyone has stated climate finance. So I would move to loss and damage, and gender is part of this as well, how losses and damages are assessed, which comes to finance as well, and also risk transfer, and also human mobility, as well as adaptation and adaptation needs. So for example, NAPS and national level as well as local level action, which needs to be supported to build resilience. Yeah, so I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have come close towards the end. I will eventually hand over to Sven to describe how you're going to put up all this in the web and all that. But before that, let me conclude by mentioning a few things. Yes, I think our panelists have highlighted some quite interesting issues, and finance and past failures, assessment of past failures of COP must be brought up more tellingly, and the CARE report is a really good starting point. And many of the issues of climate change, the negative impact, they're differentially and very negatively going to impact women and those what we call those left behind at the bottom of the totem pole, the most marginalized people, women, children, aged, handicapped, that we have. There's a research we're in the middle of looking at all that also. Now, one question that came up, and I think South-South cooperation from Kimboa, I think there's a very rich, as Vasita's presentation also showed, there's a very rich set of activities, solutions being found in the global South. People are doing things at the grassroots, at the village, at the urban slum area issues and all. This is generally sort of missed at the high eagle eye science level and at the global high policy level there. So one focus also should be on increased South-South collaboration. There's a lot of learning to be done. For example, for Nepal from, let's say, Sri Lanka or Bangladesh or even other far-off Africa and Latin American countries, as is their learning about the successes of community mobilization, community forestry, community water supply, community electricity in Nepal, where we have some resounding successes. Some of those community electricity groups are run entirely by women. The Mothers Group of Nepal, one of the most powerful citizen-based organizations. Okay, that's one thing. And the second one that I would add from my kind of research is that I think Climate Action Network and its partners, CARE and others, might like to go back to addressing what we call issues of footprints. Okay, the water and energy footprints in products. Right now, we have a very distorted global economy where, sitting in Kathmandu, I can enjoy pineapples from God knows where in Latin America, whereas my farmers in Nepal growing pineapples or growing whatever it is, potatoes, okay, cannot compete with products imported from thousands and thousands of kilometers away, burning a lot of fossil fuel. And that is because we have not, as environmentalists and social activists, highlighted this issue of water and energy footprints. If a product has too high a water and energy footprint, it should be appropriately discouraged or taxed or whatever. Whereas local products grown locally, even on my rooftop garden, for instance, I mean, those things have shown that they have much lower water and energy footprints. Okay. And they're also less, they have less drudgery, less money to spend. So there are these new areas for environmental activism that as Global South Network people, we need to focus on. So I think this panel and the participation has been very interesting. I'd like to thank all of you for your very active participation. And I'd like to hand over to Sven for some of the closing technical details and tell us how we keep in touch in the future. Sven, over to you and over from my side.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sven Hameling from CARE. Thank you very much to Deepak for a great facilitation and, of course, for all the great inputs. I think it was really rich discussion. Just a few words on the follow-up. Those people who registered through the registration link, of course, we have your addresses. So we will be able to share afterwards the recording of this webinar, and we'll also be able to share the report and related information once we have everything ready and out next week. So watch out for that communication. I understand there have been people who joined through Sanjay's contact, and maybe we don't have all the contacts from them, but I'm sure there are ways of distributing it through the cancer networks. Yeah, so you will be able to have another listening and another viewing of this session if you're interested in, but also stay in touch with us, of course, afterwards on the information discussed in this seminar on the way to the COP, and of course also in relation to the joint care and cancer report. So I think I can close with that and wish everyone a good rest of the day and the week, and thanks again to everyone who played an active role here, and we look forward to further exchange and driving this agenda forward in the future.